If we're palpating this vessel, one of the things that we're feeling for, one of the main things that we're feeling for with qi is the integrity of that vessel. Okay, so this is one of the major markers, because the whole thing that I'm saying is that qi is about integrity. We're measuring on the right side of the pulse the capacity of our body to integrate things. And so that capacity for integration is in large part, able to be observed through the integrity of the feel of the vessel. If I put my finger on a vessel like this and it collapses, it disintegrates. What is that saying about the capacity of that person to integrate the world? Right? Think about that. I'm the world. To this person's wrist, I'm the world. You know what I mean? I'm the world. So here we are, like real time, contacting them. So right, it's air, it's food, and it's also just anything coming into them. So I'm the world, and I'm encountering them, and it's like a stress test. It's a version of a stress test. You know, it's like I'm pushing in, and as I push in, what happens? Do they just collapse and like leave the building? You know what I mean? Like that happens sometimes. We've all felt that. You just touch them and it's like collapse, evacuation. It's like gone. They leave the building. Nobody is home anymore. I could come in and just like take all the furniture, take all the things off the walls. You know what I mean? And so that's it, right? Over. So another time I might feel a little bit and it feels like they're home. But then the moment I like press on the door a little bit, then the door swings open and they leave, right? Or I come to the front door and there's not even a door. That happens, right? This is why it's crucially important to have places that you go to, as opposed to just going and finding the pulse. Because in my analogy, you might be going and finding the pulse like in their living room. You just like walk into their house. Anybody home? Anybody home? And then they just like, nobody answers. And then they're like in their bedroom reading a book. And you're like, oh, there you are. And they're like, yeah, I didn't hear you. Or I heard you, but I couldn't get up. I couldn't come to the door. I was too tired, right? And so, there they are in their bedroom like that, right? So that thing. That would be equivalent to you just starting your diagnosis. And then if you just find the pulse and that's where you start and you think that's okay, then that's like what you're saying. It's like there's no pathology here, that they couldn't get up to answer the door and we started our conversation in their bedroom while they're reading a book in their bathrobe. And if that's fine with you, then you're missing something. you're missing the big picture. You've missed the big picture. That's a real problem. That's a pathology, right? So that is equivalent to starting your pulse diagnosis, where you find the pulse. You have to start your pulse diagnosis where the front door is. Right. So if you in the tradition that I'm using and the way that I'm using it, that front door is fairly clearly defined. I mean, there's some variation, but generally speaking, that front door is at 3 beans of pressure, 6 beans maybe of pressure, between 3 to 6 beans of pressure. So one soybean of pressure is extremely light. 3 soybeans of pressure is still pretty light, extremely light. What I'm saying is like, between 3 and 6 is the front door. Maybe 3 is the lawn, or like the stoop. But 6, that's like foyer, front door. That's your front of your house. Once you go into 6, between 6 and 9, once you're in 9, you're like in their living room. 9, you're in the living room. You're in the kitchen. 12, you've gone into the basement. And 15, you're like in the deep recesses of the basement. You know what I mean? Maybe you're in like a door under at the basement floor. You know what I mean? Like you're like underneath there's like a hole down there, and there's like a whole other like layer down in the undercellar of the basement. So I'm the world. and I'm encountering you and trying and seeing what kind of resistance, what kind of, in this case, I shouldn't say resistance, I want to use the word integrity. What's the integrity of your house? Now, that would mean that as I push into the pulse, you should have some resistance to the pulse, but not so much resistance that you're like, throw me out. You know what I mean? It's like, that's another analogy. It's like I come to the front door and you don't open the door. Look through the peephole. What do you want? You know what I mean? Get out of here, kid. You know what I mean? That's too much resistance.
Get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn. Right? And then like release the hounds. So release the hounds, that's a whole other thing. That's like the moment you like step on the property. So the moment you step on the property, that's where the pulse is, felt up here. You know what I mean? That's a pounding pulse. You release the hounds, step on the property, and it breaks out like that. So when it comes to the vectors of qi, what we want to say is that we're measuring this ability to meet the world, to have integrity. So then the degree of that lack of integrity would represent this vector here. So this is a direct correspondence of the degree of qi deficiency is equivalent to the degree of that lack of integrity. So if I'm in a situation where I'm having that this resistance happens at 3 beans of pressure, or rather there's a lack of resistance at 3 or lack of resistance at 6, but at 9 there's integrity, that's a certain level of qi deficiency, right? But if I have the situation where I push in on the pulse and it just there's no resistance until I get to 12, that is by definition a deep pulse, and therefore by definition a yang deficiency. It's specifically this vector of integrity. That's really the point I'm trying to make. So I'm not, without giving you the names, all of these have names, right? So we would name each of those levels. They would be a name of a particular pulse quality, like this. So just, and there's other parts of the definition. The feeble pulse itself would be a progression from a deep pulse. The deep pulse itself being that nobody's home until we get to 12. But if we get to 12 and you're in your bedroom and you're like, hey, I'm sorry I didn't hear you, I was too tired to get up, but anyway, I'm glad you're here. Let me get dressed and we can go have some tea. Okay, that's one thing. But if I get into your bed and you're like, can't even get out of bed, and that's a whole other thing. So there are degrees of the deep pulse. So the next degree of the deep pulse would be a pulse which is feeble. So that is by definition a pulse which is deep, but is also thin, and is also coming and going in terms of its ability to be palpated. I'm going to say for this formula, I think it should have this pulse, because I try to be very specific in this model of where I think somebody is, because to me this is so clear in my clinical practice that this is what's going on. This is what's going on. That these are the vectors of aging.